a round table, panel discussion. And we use the theme of incubation for this. One of the common themes behind most of us in the audience is that we focus on design technology as part of our careers, day to day, but also, trajectories, within our industry. And what we wanted to do is talk to individuals in our industry that have holistically adopted this concept of design technology, and they've adopted it in different scales, in different ways. And we wanted to have these individuals share some of their thoughts on the industry, but also share some of their lessons learned and some of their success stories behind this adoption of design technology and being able to kind of take an industry and move it forward. We always have these discussions about how archaic the AEC industry is and how it's a downward spiral, it's a race to the bottom, and so on and so forth. And there's always these kind of motivative actions to try to make a change, right? But these individuals are actually taking proactive approach to making a change within our industry. So with that being said, I want to start on the far side with Janet Simpson, president of tvsdesign. We have Kenn Clausen, computational designer at GXN. Did I say that right?
Yeah, almost.
Clausen.
Clausen.
Roderick Bates, principal at KieranTimberlake. Ray Daddazio, president at Thornton Tomasetti. And we have Stephen Van Dyke, partner at Element Architects. So briefly, we could start from either end. Just give a little bit of introduction about yourselves and kind of like how you got to where you are today. Briefly, Ray.
Well, go ahead.
Wow, okay. Well, I'm an architect, right, so I'm a designer by nature, and really have enjoyed discovering the role that technology can play in that over my career. And I think that insight, whatever little bit of it I had, was pretty instrumental for me in just knowing enough to be dangerous and what kinds of things to ask the good, really smart people in our firm and other firms to kind of push new ways of working forward. And part of that has been this pursuit of having a research and development group within the firm, which is called Tech Studio at LMN. And they played a really important role in advancing those agendas in the firm, and for many reasons, and we can get into that in a little while, but that's the short of it for me.
So I'm not going to go back like 40 years or anything because it'll probably bore everybody. But I came to Thornton Tomasetti as part of the merger in 2015 with Weidlinger. I was Weidlinger's CEO. Before that position at Weidlinger, I was the head of the Weidlinger's Applied Science business unit. In fact, that's where I grew up, in that business unit, the Applied Science business unit. So my bent has always been technology, developing new and better ways of doing things, things that nobody really ever thought could be done. And one of the reasons we did the merger with Thornton Tomasetti was because it was a firm with a like culture. Thornton Tomasetti's big goal, right? We may never get there, but what we're trying to do is be the global driver of change and innovation in our industry. And when you look at how we're going to get there, right, one of the ways is, we say, to bet the farm on innovation. And so that was the essence of those two statements were what attracted me to Thornton Tomasetti. And it's basically an extension of what I've been doing my whole career. So that's how I got to where I am and why I'm here.
So just to be clear, I'm not an architect. Yeah, exactly, so I don't have to recover. So what I do actually at KieranTimberlake is I head up the commercialization of new design technologies, and how that came about essentially is that we were designing a lot of great buildings, and in the course of doing so, we had to develop a lot of novel tools and techniques and things like that to make those buildings possible. But we realized that you're not going to move the needle very far by just doing a handful of great buildings. You really need to give people the means to themselves create similar buildings that achieve those high levels of performance that we think are important. So what we decided to do was to create the capacity within our firm to package those internal tools and make them accessible as products to outside audiences. So that was something that was important to me. It seemed like a challenge that would not only be exciting, but would have a positive implication for the industry. And so something that I stepped into wholeheartedly, and I find myself here.
Yes, and I graduated 7 years ago, so I studied at a school that works in the fusion between architecture and engineering. So I never really know, and I still don't know really what I am. But what I know is that when I finished school, I was really sick and tired of architecture. So I started working with artists, started working with just making pavilions, learning how to weld, and learning all of these dirty tools, just how they work. Then I met up with Casper, who is the leader of GXN. And he said, you need to get in love with robots because we have a research project running. And after that, it really took off, and I've now been involved with the digital group for 6 years, working mainly in our more complex projects. And how I got here is because a year ago I met Charlie. And the funny thing is, and it's when I look around, the funny thing is I have known him for years now because I've been using Flux. So it's funny like how that works out, that all of this open sharing makes you suddenly end up here telling the story of where you're from. So I think that's the start for me, but there's a lot of more to come.
My background and what brought me here is really very surprising, probably to wind up really with a technology conference, because that is not something that someone usually attributes to one of my high skill sets. But what I am highly skilled at is more strategy. And so I was a principal at tvsdesign prior to becoming president. I was a principal in the workplace studio and very much involved in workplace strategy and understanding business and understanding what makes businesses thrive and how the built environment connects to that. And so when I assumed the role of president in 2017, I immediately started a whole new strategy for the firm. And one of the key components of that, as you were saying, was I truly wanted to elevate the whole digital practice. And one of the ways that we did that was I took the traditional principal role, which had just been one singular role, one singular title, and we broke it to sector principles, market principles, and quality principles. And the quality principles were around design, technology, which were core known parts of the business, but the new one was digital practice. And then we hired in a digital practice. And we also created a role around innovation and applied knowledge and innovation. And so it's been those types of catalysts that started to elevate the role, but it also is interesting because we started attracting different types of talent into the firm, and it's been very rewarding to see how that change, that catalyst of change has started to redefine a different career path for people and allow that environment. And so really what my passion is to create the environment to let that thrive and to be open to the ideas of change, whether it means the business model or the structure of the firm, to allow that to have the role that it really should have. But I do have to give the disclaimer, I don't know how to do most of what you guys are talking about, but I know it's important.
I mean, that kind of segues into my follow-up question, is that, each of you are embracing it, and, some of the technologies, that even I speak on myself to that, I graduated with, or some of them are no longer being used, right? So the idea of, whether you know how to use it or not, somewhat becomes irrelevant over time, because we all somewhat phase out of it due to the evolution of the industry in itself. But, at what point in time for you folks was it this kind of Eureka moment where, like, yes, we need to focus on this. This is something that is important to us. It's not just a cliche. It's not just, some young guns coming out of school, pushing buttons, making things move around. What part was that moment where you realized this was a good idea for your businesses?
Well, look, I would just say maybe there never was a time we didn't think it was a good idea. And it manifested itself differently in different time frames, different eras, right? From the 80s to the 90s, right? I mean, what you could do digitally was certainly different. But we were always trying to push the envelope because the problems we were solving were not, for the most part, easy problems. And so I don't think there was a time that we ever said, I have to do it this way. We were always, it's part of the DNA, you know? There never was an aha moment. I think that, you know, getting that spread throughout a firm of 1,500 people does take work. But, you know, the leadership is solidly behind promulgating tools and proselytizing a lot. And, you know, we try our best to make sure that that gets to every part of the firm.
Well, sure, I would absolutely echo this idea of it being part of the DNA, and I think that comes from the idea that you always want to produce better projects and better outcomes. And that's not going to happen by doing things the same way every time. So innovation is necessary if that's part of your ethos. I think the other thing, though, that did change for us is this idea that our methods in and of themselves can have value outside of strictly our projects. And I think there was an aha moment associated with that that was in many ways sort of born out of seeing other people develop tools and sort of like an open source community and the idea that tools can be shared and exchanged with different parties. I think there hadn't been, it always had seemed to us that software development or tool development was one that was held within the rarefied realms of sort of these behemoths like Autodesk. And the idea that a small player can do something fantastic that can really proliferate around the industry wasn't necessarily something that had occurred to us, I think, probably until there was almost something in the ether where there's, you know, a growth of hacking culture. You start to see more and more people come out of school with an understanding of software development, things like that. So a lot of different pieces had to come together, a lot of different infrastructure, more refined code libraries that we could leverage, things like that. So I think there was also an opportunity just about what was available out there that makes things possible. Like a conference like this, you know, it would be a very different conference 15 years ago. I mean, this would be, you know, you'd be people working on the absolute extreme edge of what's even possible. Whereas now a lot of these tools, you know, your people are getting things that are almost, I wouldn't say they're pre-digested, but, you know, they're ready to use in a lot of respects, which is pretty remarkable. So I think there's a little bit of an aha moment there that perhaps we weren't conscious of at the time. But just like you were saying, you always evolve, you're always looking, you're always searching. And part of that is just being aware of how your context and what tools and resources are changing.
I think for me, there's kind of two stories I want to tell. Story one is my first aha moment was actually how GXN started. And it was our 3XN founder, Kim Herford, who wanted to look at new materials. He really wanted to see that new material affects and change our buildings. And then he found Casper. And Casper started in the basement with a little record player and just started having fun with making small lamps, testing different types of materials. And this story for me just says a lot about where GXN is coming from. It's really focusing on green. Today I still feel that it's maybe more geeks and geometry, but it's a balance between those 2, 3, 4 different stories. Eureka Moment 2 for me happened 4 years ago when we assigned an anthropologist to our team. And he started scanning us, like, who are we? Like, what does digital culture, what does it mean when you use a mouse and you change something on your screen? What does it mean? And you had to talk about that. And he said, for him, all tools in the world has nothing to do with a technical issue. Everything is a social issue. Like, how do you interact with the tool? How do people that you work with, how do they understand the tools that you make or the workflow? So I think that was my little Eureka moment for the group.
I think I had more of an aha opportunity more than an aha moment. And I think that opportunity was assuming a leadership role that gave me the ability to really influence things. But I guess an important part of it is that TVS Design's a 52-year-old firm. So I was leading a group of amazingly talented designers that had been, it was part of the DNA. I mean, because of the scale and complexity that we deal with, they were doing very early computational design, exercises. They were using things on the projects. I just looked at that and thought one of the early strategy drivers was radically relevant service, and anything that we needed to do to create that. And part of that, to me, was taking what was already happening within the firm and giving it a different platform to where it could thrive and be more of a driver. So for me, I think as long what you all were saying all along the way, I understood the significance of it, but it was just more of being able to have the opportunity to try to actually impact that in a significant way.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's been persistent through the life of the firm over the last 40 years. But I think for us, I think it's more a narrative of many, many little aha moments that add up to something really significant. And of course, there are like the wins, the major wins, which are obvious, like things when you realize like you can develop your own tools and you can develop ways of working that change the way you deliver buildings, and you can all of a sudden then now deliver different kinds of things to your buildings, and you can change the way you offer services, and you can fabricate things for your buildings, and all those things have been really important to us. But I think the equally important aha moment is the realization that some of that's not going to work, and that some of that is just going to kind of fail, and you have to be okay with failure in order to be pushing in this area. And I think that's something that's a little unconventional that not a lot of firms are willing to address and willing to tackle. And it is something that's not too painful and shouldn't be as scary as people think it is.
To follow up on that notion that there are moments of failure, the first instinct that comes to mind is essentially to run away and shut down. Like, we tried this, it failed. Let's go in a different direction, right? So were there ever moments where you thought that maybe this isn't actually a good thing? Did you ever think that, well, we developed this strategy, it's not really paying out as much as we thought it would be, it's not really adopting so well within the firm. Is there something that we should actually kind of do a 180 and kind of retreat sort of situation?
So, yeah. I wish we had that thought a lot earlier.
Yeah.
We actually have a couple of colleagues in the office, and one of the things we went through as an exercise recently was we're actually an ISO certified firm, so everything has a process, which is actually not as restrictive as it sounds. But one of the things, we actually have a process for evaluating projects and whether or not we shut them down. We have a list of criteria. We say, all right, is this ever going to make money? Is this something where someone else is actually doing the same thing but better? Questions like that, you have to ask yourself and be quite honest about. And then, shutting down a project doesn't just mean shutting down. It might mean something that maybe this is something we distribute to the community at large. Maybe it's something that is better handled by like a nonprofit entity or something like that. Maybe it's something that is just now an internal tool. Or maybe it really is something that we lock away in a closet and never tell anyone about. You never know what's going to happen. But I will say absolutely that there has been cases like that. And failure can be certainly productive. I think that some of the lessons we've learned have been really expensive. We did a project where we were doing IoT, where we were actually developing the hardware itself. The embedded hardware programming, designing chips, having our boards, having them manufactured for us, things like that. And after going down that road, we did some external beta testing where we found that the customer support requirement that came along with hardware, it's like there was no way we could charge enough money to actually make money given how much hand-holding we had to do with customers. And there was something where if we had a better sense of the questions that needed to be asked throughout development, like, what do you think the anticipated customer support requirement is going to be? We could have ended that project potentially a lot earlier. So there the lesson was, what questions are you asking earlier so you don't spend so much money to do something that you find out the answer to later. But I wish I had learned that particular lesson earlier, but it's something now that we take with us in every project when we develop something.
But the thing is, you never really can know the answer to that question all the time, right?
You can't, and sometimes you get totally bunk information on a lot of different things. I think the other thing we learned too is that when people tell you things about market size and things like that, it can be totally unreflective reality. We were working with Autodesk that had a retainer with Deloitte, and they presented an estimate of market size for one of our products that I would say would be fanciful, but that would probably be a bit generous. And the end result is, you make a lot of assumptions based off information that, you just don't know till you do it. And,
I mean, we've seen the same thing, and they're even to this day, is everything going to be successful that we're trying? I don't know. We'll know in some future state, right? But you just don't know that, and that's why I think the idea is to have a lot of bets, and when you see something not working, just end it, because what's the point, So you have to fail fast, right? And then that's not really failing. You just move on to the next thing. So I think you can never really know, because you're trying to predict the future, right? If we could do that, we should all be at OTB betting on horse races. It would be a much better way to make money if that's what we're trying to do. So, and then there's some areas you think you can get into. I can tell you, a story, a Weidlinger story from like the late 80s, early 90s, right? We used to solve a lot of wave propagation problems. We still do, right? These are, shock waves in soil, water, right? Ultrasonic problems. And we had code that was very, very efficient and very fast. And we were using, computers of the old days, right? So somebody had this idea, we should make a chip, and we just have somebody program the wave equation into the hardware. This is like in 1990. And we found somebody to do this, and we spent like $50,000 back in the day. It's a lot of money. And what we didn't understand, because we're not computer scientists, right? So that was our, so we found somebody who told us they could get the code into the chip, but the buses at the time were not fast enough to transfer the data for as fast as the chip could compute. So the chip has to stop while data goes through a primitive bus, right? Today, literally that same software, was a company that we've spun off called OnScale, and it's doing that kind of stuff, in the cloud now. Right? It's infinitely scalable. I can get as many CPUs as I want, and that efficient code is now in an environment that you can solve any wave propagation problem you want, basically, that people couldn't even conceive of even 5 years ago. And there's a modicum of success. We just had a Series A investment from Intel Ventures, Intel Capital, and Google's Gradient Ventures, and we're moving in the right direction. Will it be successful? I don't know, right? But right now it's doing okay, right? But it's that same stuff that we tried literally 30 years ago, basically. So we didn't give up when we failed with that idea, right?
With regards to, taking some of these approaches, right? There's a point where you're either fully bought in from the beginning, or you get convinced, over time by seeing kind of like a proof of concept or the successes and kind of recovery from these, fast failures, right? And then you start to become kind of the leader of this initiative and kind of pushing forth this initiative within your firm. There's always people that are early adopters, and there's always people that are kind of, we'll call them the late adopters. We'll stay positive on that note. How do you have these discussions with some of your peers so that they also can see the topic in the same light that you're seeing it. You know, do you ever have moments where the minute you start kind of understanding that, this technology, design technology, is something that is actually a benefit to us and it actually could be integral part of our businesses, that then they start to kind of like shun it off or say, no, well, they've gone off, I don't want to have these discussions with them. They're putting us too much at risk, that sort of thing. So how do you have these discussions with, some of your, the senior leaders within your firms?
I think for my case, it's there's a lot of stories here, but I think one of them is you need good stories, and sometimes, unfortunately, you also need the bad stories to show that what you could have done would have been maybe better. And then they come like down the line and say, hey, could this tool that you are using could have solved something on the facade? But going back to your question, so what I see, it's kind of an internal, external thing that is happening. Sometimes it's also being part of these communities. We have a lot of our leadership that also goes to these, maybe not directly these events, but events and see some magic tool, and then they come to us and say, hey, what is this? And then we take it through the filter and explains what it is. So there's a certain, there's a change in this. But one example that I like to refer back to is there's a project up there that is popping up sometimes on the screen, which is a project that took us 5-6 years to develop. It was really tricky because in the beginning I was just thrown into the project and nobody really know who is this guy, what can he do. And one day I just realized that every time I was asked to spit out the center points and vectors for the columns and then push them over to Revit, and then I never asked questions. I was just like, what? Just send it over. Then after time number 10, I just, what is happening here? And then I realized that the guy sitting next to me, he was sitting and placing each column by himself, and then rotating it one by one around these columns here. And this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And from there on, I think also being part of all of these projects down in the machine room actually helps to bring all of this up together, so that you show like more you help problems at the beginning, you solve problems in the beginning, and then later on it becomes a bit more complex. So today the questions that you are asked from the seniors are way more advanced than what it was before. So I think that's kind of an internal, external thing.
Yeah, I would add to that for us it's a similar story, that you kind of have to lead by example and prove, and then I think people pretty quickly see the benefits of thinking differently and working differently. It's also challenging to make sure that others can adopt that over time. I think the adoption of it, which you mentioned earlier, I think is something it's persistently challenging for many of us to make sure that the whole firm can begin to operate at that level. I do think that for us, thinking about research in sort of split ways, as sort of blue sky research as well as applied research, has been really important to know that some of this may or may not go somewhere, but some of it is going to drastically affect the work that we're actually doing. So making sure that the research is applied to the work to some degree has been really critical in making sure that that we're getting mileage out of it, and that we have good stories that have good financial performance and aesthetic performance and building performance associated with them.
One thing I think relates to the sort of the blue sky and whatnot and applied. I mean, one of the aspects of research that we do is, of course, the evaluation of other people's tools and how to incorporate those effectively. So it doesn't always have to be something that's homemade, but even having a process that's associated with that, where there's individuals that will evaluate that tool. That evaluation becomes one that's written out, and the criteria of evaluation are very explicit and communicated to both leadership and people that are sort of at the team level. It makes a big difference as far as adoption, because otherwise just saying, here's a tool, I'm telling you it's better, go for it, that doesn't work. But of course also the cost of tools is high, and so there's real value into the evaluation. One thing I have noticed on the other side of it, which is the tools that we create that we then provide to the greater industry, is that oftentimes the uptake is actually greater at firms outside of KieranTimberlake than within KieranTimberlake. We have firms that are using our lifecycle assessment software, Tally, at a level that vastly exceeds what we're doing internally. Now, we certainly use it on our projects, but there's other firms where every employee has installed in their machine. They're using it iteratively throughout their design process. And there's nothing quite like dangling what some other firm is doing with your own software to really get leadership to want to step it up. So, sometimes you find those ways to get that competitive spirit going as a leverage point.
I think that the heart of your question is about communication, which is the hardest thing to really use to its full advantage. And for me, with the strategy that we create, we have 5 priorities and initiatives. And one of the priorities is all around technology, and there are a lot of initiatives under that. So one that is a communication tool. I communicate it to the entire firm. I have conversations about different things. Why are we doing these things? And while I do have the ability to make the decisions and make the ultimate call, obviously it is an environment where you need buy-in, and you need an environment that everyone feels like that they have a voice and a say. And a lot of my energy goes into creating this open communication environment. And which means I have a complete open door policy, and people can come in, we talk. I have very frequent interactions with the principals. But I was in a conversation just earlier this week that was one of those moments where I felt like my vision for what was really a priority and important for our future was in complete conflict with the kind of viewpoint of something I was being challenged on by one of the leaders. And I felt like they had I understood their context. I just didn't feel like, I was like, yeah, but I just see it different. And in those moments, I have to stop and think, what am I really trying to achieve here? Do I want to convince them that I'm right, or do I just want to create an environment where communication is open and we still have this good dialogue where all voices are heard, but we still have something to measure against that says, yeah, but this is the strategic priority, so this aligns with that strategic priority. So we've had this discussion, but we're still going to have to we have to do something to achieve this, because we all agreed we were going to achieve this. And honestly, those conversations and those moments, it's more than when I get up in front of the firm and say, this is what we're doing. It's in those individual conversations that makes or breaks it. And I do better at those some days than others, because I have to get in the right mind frame to not argue about it, but to listen.
That's a hard thing.
It's a hard thing, because what you're really thinking sometimes doesn't need to be what's coming out of your mouth.
I'd be curious, just as a follow-up question, that type of emotional intelligence is hard. And I'm curious on how you do navigate something where you have, because of your senior position, have to say, no, this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. But how do you ensure that open door of communication still exists? Like, how do you protect the ego of the person whose idea you're shutting down, essentially? Because that is an important skill in a lot of ways.
And to me, it's reminding myself, what is the priority of the end game of this conversation? Because that always starts to guide what my reaction is to that person, because there is a very different way to say the same thing but not make you feel like you're getting shut down. Because if I shut them down, I feel like that's the ultimate bad end. I don't want them to leave. I don't want them to not continue to do what they do. And it is hard. And that's why I said I'm better at it some days than others. And sometimes there needs to be time and distance between the time I'm asked a question and when I respond to it.
It's the hardest thing. I had a coach, and they told me I had to learn to breathe deeply. And then when I learned to breathe deeply, I still had to stop rolling my eyes. So it's like the whole body language is there, It can be frustrating.
Yeah, so there's, a lot of folks in our industry start to talk about how rapidly our industry is changing and all, but really our industry is in a constant state of evolution, right? It's just changing at a more rapid rate, right? You don't go into firms and see, white shirts and black ties over large drafting boards anymore, right?
Yeah.
The environments have changed, what we do has changed, how we deliver projects have changed, and the scope of our projects have changed quite a bit. Kind of following on a question that I asked earlier is that, we all say change is good, and it's great, but we are creatures of habit. Change any one of our habits that we have today, and, we'd all be a little disgruntled, whether we keep it inside or actually voice it, right? So how do you, bring this concept of change within how things work within your firm, whether it's how you hire specific staff with specific knowledge, talking about, inviting individuals that are not architects, to be part of an architecture firm, or whether it's, changing a process of how a project gets delivered, right? How do you convey that without locking the individuals up in terms of this concept of fear of change?
Look, I think that change is happening whether you like it or not. That's just what it is, right? And so, and people do, feel comfortable working the way they do. And I think, to me, it's best if you can do things incrementally. You don't necessarily want to have revolution. You want to have evolution. You want to have that evolution as quickly as it needs to be to, I would say in our case, to stay ahead of the curve. But if you introduce too many things, people they get overloaded, and it's not gonna, it won't work. So I just think that kind of paced evolutionary change, trying to stay away from revolutions, is a way to manage that change. But the change is happening, so you can't avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like my background was environmental management. I have a master's from Yale School of Forestry, and they were talking about ecosystem management. One of the options for management is to do nothing. That is a management decision. So it's almost as if you're just sitting there watching the forest do its thing. You're actually intentionally doing something in that context. The one other thing, though, I would...
Then it could burn down when there's a lightning strike, right?
That's perfectly legitimate. Some forests need to burn, and probably more frequently than they do. But one thing I would also say, though, that I think that it's important, and probably gets to a little bit about how working with people and understanding culture, is also recognizing, too, that change for the sake of change isn't necessarily beneficial. But like what you were saying, like, what's the goal? And so if your goal is something, then they say you can sort of look at what are proposed changes, test them against that particular goal. And one thing I have noticed, too, is that there's a lot of skills that what people would say are kind of traditional that are becoming more and more desirable. It's like Amazon opening up a bookstore. You do need to look backwards a little bit. And there's only a handful of people at our firm that can draft, for instance, like freehand draw, incredibly valuable skill. So there's things like that where that you have to recognize that there's value all across sort of this time continuum, and you always want to take something with you, but you have to pack light because there's going to be new stuff that you're going to take up as you go. So I think, like you were saying, what's your goal, and be very cognizant about that, and then test these methods and your evolution of your process against that goal.
I think for us, we often refer to it as memory and memory module. So we kind of compare to architecture and research. If I take research first, and our unit, we scale organically. We don't really adjust to any kind of things that are happening around us. It depends on our projects and who we need and what type of. It could be a biologist, a psychologist we need in a research project. But a lot of us I've been there 6 years, and I'm maybe the youngest in the team almost. A lot of people have been there for years and have been doing research projects, different types of research projects, and we really want to keep that knowledge internally, like really, so we can continue on that road. And what I see in our architectural department, unfortunately, is that then you have a team that sits so long on a project together, but then they are scattered up, and then all of this knowledge is suddenly gone again. And I think these relationships are quite key to kind of keep continuing and evolving into projects. So what I'm really hoping for also in the future for us is that some of the projects that the digital group are involved in, we are linked up with the people who are very skillful in human renders or are really skillful in facade details, that we stay together and then we kind of evolve together. I think that's kind of the two different things that I see between research and practice.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. For us, it's about culture, and for us, the culture of a single studio in a single place is really important. So scale, I don't know how you guys handle the scale things. It blows my mind how big that challenge could possibly be across multiple offices. But for us, that's a really important thing, is to make sure that that sort of knowledge base stays relatively tight and we can keep people together. And it's about relationships and the culture of that, from our perspective, I think makes the change a lot easier, a lot more manageable.
I just ran a couple of year-long experiment on how fast you can actually implement change. And I had some successes, and I'm quite sure that everyone can tell you, what they felt like my failures might have been. But I think that there's a couple of key things about, especially when you're doing organizational change. And you've got to have a clear communication plan about what is happening. But you also have to have some things about what you feel like are constants that aren't going to change. Like there are some kind of sacred things that we are still about this. So we just went, in 17 and 18, we went through a 2-year strategy that I called the refounding plan. And I called it that because I just assumed a new position. And I knew I was about to make some pretty dramatic changes. And especially when we came up with a whole new org chart, some significant changes, some new priorities in the firm. And technology was one of those things that this got lifted up in a whole new way. Marketing, branding was another one. This applied research and innovation was another one. So I started to tip the scales of what was talked about and valued in the firm as career paths in a little bit different way. And when we came out of that refounding plan, I thought it was really important to say, okay, here's what we're doing, and we're going to go on the trailblazing plan. And this is what it is. Within that context, there are any number of different things that people said. I introduced concepts a couple of years ago that are just now people are starting to see it. The rule is that did not make up. I've heard this. You have to say something 7 times before people really hear it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? So that can be kind of exhausting. But the consistency to which we communicate has to be kind of almost exhausting to the leader, because there has to be such a clear message. But they're truly, like when we reintroduce the new structure for the firm, I don't think that was widely understood why exactly it was that way. But it was okay because the pieces were starting to slide into place, that there was a larger picture around. But I will say I did take a lot of chances. I thought that there were 2 bets I could make. I could leave things alone and try to slowly change them, and that might not be enough. Or I could try to do it more rapidly, like rip the Band-Aid off, get things in place, and let's just see if we could go on this ride together. But in the middle of it all was that intensity of an open culture of relationships that allows the communication to happen, which isn't perfect. But I've done some pretty significant changes by calling it, but the 2 words, refounding and trailblazing, were very intentional, and it says a lot about all the intention behind it. But not easy, and lots of stories.
I mean, if it was easy, anybody would do it, right?
Huh?
If it was easy, anybody would do it.
Yeah, right.
There's 2 opinions here. You're talking about evolution of change, and you were talking about ripping off the Band-Aid. Ripping off the Band-Aid sounds like something you should do if, it's like there's an imperative there. Was there, in fact, an imperative that drove you towards that?
Yeah, actually, a little bit. Some of it was prior to my coming in and assuming the role, we had a pretty bad financial year for a number of different reasons, which is easily known to the architecture community. Projects go on hold. You've earned them, but they don't happen. But it was like a perfect storm of things happening all at once, and that was just prior to my coming in. And we had a lot of people retire all at once too. So there were some significant moments where the things that had been in place that I think we could have said, this is how we've been very successful, you know, getting up to this point, we're all starting to fall away for different reasons. So I did feel a little bit of that burning platform moment. I did feel that. And I also recognized that in that moment of leadership change, I had a brief window of a little bit of grace period, if you will, that people would give me that moment of, well, she's just assumed this role, so we would expect a little change. So I also bet on that a little bit.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want it to seem like, I mean, I said change to, you know, make sure we are always staying ahead of that curve, right? So, but you know, there are those times, you know, 2008-9 was a cataclysmic time, if any of you were around working at that time, right? And stuff happens rapidly, right? You know, the firm today is in good, I think, you know, I didn't want to jinx anything, but from a leadership perspective, you know, we have a spectrum of leaders of different, you know, different ages, and we, you know, just announced a leadership transition for January 1st of next year, and I think, you know, we're on, you know, we're not at that Band-Aid ripping moment. Hopefully we won't be, but you know, there can be outside forces for sure that will, you know, change whatever I'm saying.
Cool. So I want to open up to the audience and see if there's any questions. We got one over on this side. She's usually on top of things.
It's good she's in great shape. It's like I have to run up and down 2 flights of stairs.
Thank you for an interesting conversation. They're all talking about, is this on? It's probably loud. I can just talk loud. They're all talking about design technology in the workplace as a business model, and I'm interested in, you know, so we want to innovate and we change for different reasons. Part of that's the bottom line, but other things are certain performance goals. And we're really, this is a room of a lot of innovators and people that are pursuing innovation. And I'm wondering how you guys think about the balance between innovation for the bottom line, innovation for the product, and innovation within the building industry as it plays a central role in how we kind of structure our cities and our society. And what kind of challenges do you see design technology most interested in addressing? And do you think that the climate today, as we pursue design technology innovation, is striking a good balance between, you know, what's the balance between bottom line interests, social interests, performative interests, and addressing some of the challenges built into our industry when facing issues like climate change and you know, life cycle questions?
So that's like the biggest question of all time, right? So let me try to start answering, and I'm sure everybody else has some good things today too. I think, look, we've embraced a concept called vitality. The Boston Consulting Group a couple of years ago wrote about you know, the Fortune 500. Well, this was the Fortune Future 50. And a vital firm is one that has to do two things. One is you have to do well. You have to run your business well. Your current business has to be run well. It has to be run profitably. At the same time, you have to be making relevant bets on the future, because if you don't, you'll end up like Blockbuster. You'll end up like BlackBerry, right? You'll end up like Kodak, making a lot of money and going out of business in 2 years. So you got to maintain. You have to maintain your focus and run your business well, and you have to be able to make relevant bets on your future. Why do you have to bet on the future? because you want to be an enduring organization. If you don't endure, right, if you don't continue to exist, you can't solve any problems. So it's really hard to have that ambidexterity. Make sure current results are good and be able to spend some money on making relevant bets on the future. If you can do that, which is hard, right, then you can endure. If you can endure, you're around to help solve the problems of society, right? But if we as a firm are not profitable, and I would say even more than average profitable, right, then we can't do anything, right? There's no R&D program unless we're profitable, right? So it's a hard thing. That ambidexterity is hard, and not every firm can do that well. And I'm not saying we do it well. I'm saying we're trying, right? We try to measure. You know, we just started. We had each of our practice leaders, right? And here's one of the ways we try to make sure that some of our innovations make it into projects. We had every practice leader, we have 10 different practices, sit down and say, what would make a project in your practice innovative, right? And so they each one came up with a list of 10 things. In my practice, I should be using Construe when I'm working on my Revit, and I transfer data from my Revit model to my SAP 2000 model, right? Or a Tekla or something, right? Okay, so use Construe is an item, right? So it doesn't mean that every project has to use it, but at the start of every single project, this 5-minute form is filled out by everybody, and they're going to say how many of these things they're doing, right? Or applicable to this job. So again, not every job is the job that you have, it's going to be like invent a light bulb, but at least everybody is thinking, oh, I don't want to make sure I didn't forget about that, right? Or I didn't talk to somebody else across the hallway, because we value cross-practice, multi-practice jobs, right? So we're trying to measure things, right? I don't have an answer yet whether it's successful or not. We've just started this, and maybe in 3 or 4 years we'll be able to see. We honestly think that the projects where we work with like-minded individuals, architecture firms, construction companies, MEP firms, right, that are like-minded, that become trusted partners, people who value you for what you bring to the table, not how cheap you can do the job. Those kind of jobs, when you sit back and you say, was this a great job? You say, well, this was great, right? I would do this again. If we can have the next team go to the next job, I'm there. You'll also find, I believe, that those are your most profitable jobs. As funny as it sounds, right? It's hard to say I had a great job when I lost money, right? It's really hard to say that. In fact, I don't think I've ever said that. So you want to work with trusted partners. You want to work with firms that are like-minded in how they approach the job, and that is, again, to get to our big goal, one of the things is we want to be a trusted partner, and we want to work with trusted partners. If we could only do that, which we can't, we're going to be one step closer to that big goal. So, it's a lot, but I would just say if the results, the current financial results of the firm are not good, it's hard to do anything else. So you got to worry about both.
I would like to jump in on this here. So for those of you who don't know our structure, we have 3XN Architects, and then we have GXN Innovation. And 3XN Architects has been like plus 30 years in the field doing all different types of buildings. GXN, as I said, has been there around for 12 years, but in 2012-13, we split. So we are not directly an R&D company underneath 3XN. We are our own machine, so we have to make our own money, which means that we don't need to earn a lot of money, we just have to break even, hopefully, in the bottom thing. And our approach has been from day one, we share everything, open share everything that is possible. This also means that sometimes we are in some kind of issues with other parties when we go out and do research. But what I want to say is that we have 3 focus areas. One is, of course, doing as much as possible for the architectural company, how much we can help out. Number 2 is we're doing research projects, and number 3, universities. We are doing a lot of studios. But number 2, the research projects and how we approach them is that we have realized we are not the best in the field at all. But we can work with the best ones here, and hopefully there's a lot of people here that want to work with us on new ideas we already have seen today. But that's our plan, and that's how we do it. So our projects are often that we are linking up with other industry partners. We are linked up with material experts, robot experts, mathematicians that helps us in solving some R&D projects. But my point is, coming back to my little green fish, circular economy, which is kind of the new thing and really the thing for us and has been for years, and we're also part of it, shaping it for the ministry in Denmark. We've been part of a project where there was 60 people from the industry involved, and there was 2 other architectural companies that actually could have been competitors for our architectural company, but we linked with them anyway, because how we believe is that if we can live together, and hopefully down the future there's more surfaces for us and we can go in and link up with them again. And that's our approach, looking at it as an R&D firm.
I think it's really interesting because between what you were saying about the profitable business and being able to balance that, and then the idea of the circle economy and all this collaboration, one of my real things that I'm exploring a lot, a very topic of extreme interest to me, is the whole business model that we have in the architecture industry. And what's interesting about it is that it's really been formulated about, we work on these unique projects within our firms, we compete, we win another one, we compete, we win another one. And there's not really a larger thought within the embedded contextual the contextual kind of format that we think about our business models in, that says, what are we doing to participate in the innovation of the built environment? How do we stay relevant in that dialogue? What is learned from this project that is now shared with others in a way that we don't consider sharing to be something that's odd, because we're like, oh, well, sorry, that's my competitor. And it's like, well, we're all in the idea of the built environment and creating the best built environment. And so there's a little bit of a mindset shift there that has to happen, that also has to translate into how we account for the money. So the metrics in the industry is all about work on billable work, right? Projects, minimize your overhead non-billable work just as much as possible, make this really good. How about you maybe have a little bit different attitude about profitability on what some things are that help to support a different infrastructure. So I think that the types of things that we need to be thinking about really are that change of mind shift about how we approach the whole business model, the contracts, and what we do. To embrace and kind of catch up to speed, what's really we're all talking about is the collaboration of it, the sharing of it, and the lifting up together, which is just, there's a little bit of change that has to happen to really make that completely possible.
I think KieranTimberlake is a little unusual because research is kind of like asking a fish if they're aware that they're in water. It's just part of who we are. We literally would be unable to design a building if you remove the research from our process. So for us, it's actually quite easy to do because we don't even think of that we're really doing research. It's just baked in at every stage of the process. And that makes it a lot easier, but of course it does make things expensive. But as you said, you think about, what is your end goal? What's your profit? How does it get applied? A lot of our profit could be going to something else, but instead we fund research. But at the same time, it also creates work that is incredibly satisfying, that we feel achieves an ethical agenda. And at the same time, everyone's able to have enough money to keep the lights on and to go home to a good, nice house and a happy family. The other thing, though, I wanted to stress is this idea of ethics in what we do. And when we look at projects, achieving an ethical agenda is on par with a lot of other things. It's there with making sure that we make enough money to be able to do the next product development exercise. And what we're looking for when we develop products isn't necessarily to say this is the thing that we can sell the most of. One of our key criteria is saying this is a gap in the industry, and if we fill it, we're achieving an ethical agenda. So when we created Tally, which was the tool that's integrated into Revit, it allows people to do life cycle assessment, understand the embodied carbon in their buildings. That's something for us, that there's an ethical agenda to that. And that's the reason why if you call up the support number, you get to talk to me pretty much as long as you want, because we're trying to get a practice integrated into the AEC community that isn't there now and needs to be. When we have our new software that looks at building operations and occupant comfort, the idea there is that this is like a blind spot. No one's looking into building performance after they're done. They hand over the keys and they walk away. But we've seen massive improvements of performance just by asking people how they feel. Like, this room's a little chilly, honestly. You could probably be saving some money by, knocking up the temp a degree or two. Things like that, where, there's some opportunities there. And so from our perspective, achieving an ethical agenda, improving these environments, that's part and parcel of what we do.
I'm glad that the topic of the bottom line came up a little bit, and like the idea of keeping the lights on. When we organized this group of speakers, it was intentional, and maybe a little selfish on my part. I'm kind of midway through my career. I like to think I'm on the younger side, but I was an individual that was pushing buttons, in an office, writing code, really happy, make things move on the screen, awesome. Give somebody a button, and they're happy, they can push it, and they could do, make things move on their screen too, right? But there was never a conversation about, what is this doing for us as a company? And the importance behind that is, if you don't have that discussion, if you don't know the importance behind it, and I'm going to stay away from the concept of value being money, right? If you don't have that concept of why is this important to us, and why is this beneficial to us, how can you continue to grow your efforts, right? For many years, I was asking we need more staff and more this and more that, and that wasn't always necessarily the best idea, right? So, because you can't have an entire firm that's an entire computational design team, right? You can't have 1,500 people that are computational designers, or could you? I don't know, right? So how can you manage that, right? In a way. I think we have a question here.
So my name is Matthew Bro from Henda Architects. That's actually kind of gets into the question I wanted to ask. Could each of you maybe give some information about the size of your kind of R&D department within the size of your overall firm? And maybe talk a little bit about what amount of the R&D kind of agenda is set from the top versus that space is created for it, and you sort of allow those initiatives to bubble up from associates or more junior staff?
So look, I don't even know. You have Rob Otani sitting there. He actually maintains the budget for Core Studio and everything associated with our R&D. So he can give you a better answer than I do. What I can tell you is that, look, there are professional service firms, right, where every dollar of profit that doesn't go to the partner's bonuses is wasted money, right? So if I'm going to spend $1 of overhead buying a piece of software, that's like my bonus goes down, right? There are firms that think that, right? And so core would be a thing that you're making my bonus lower, right? That could be the farthest thought from anybody at Thornton Tomasetti, right? And why are we spending bonus dollars, I put that in quotes, on things like this, right? We're all here. We've been doing this for 7 years, right? Sharing with the industry is, first, there's an ethical part, right? We want to make sure that our industry is not last in innovation as it was in 2014, right? according to that famous Harvard Business Review chart that, you know, we put up at so many different meetings, right? And obviously, not everybody has the same, you know, not everybody is the same, but I can tell you, all of the senior people at Thornton Tomasetti believes that core also drives business into their practices, right? That, you know, there's a crazy geometry, we don't know how to do it, a core guy goes to Boston and helps them, right? Right? I mean, I can't even tell you the amounts of times that happens, right? So even if you're not a believer, there's another level as we actually make money out of it, right? In the whole, right? When we talk about innovation, you know, we started, and Shannon knows this better than anybody since she maintains that portion of our intranet, we have an idea incubator, right? We have innovation tournaments about 3 or 4 times a year where anybody, and anybody at any time, literally, can submit one piece of paper divided into quadrants about what their idea is, how they're going to do it, why is this good, and what kind of resources do they need, and it gets considered for an R&D award, right? And that's open to every single person in the firm. And I don't know, there's hundreds of, I don't even know anymore, right? It's just hundreds and hundreds. And they're all maintained because sometimes, you know, something that wasn't a good idea, you know, that didn't make it the first time will get combined with something else and make it the third time, right? I mean, none of my ideas ever get funded, which is something I have to complain about, but it's okay. So but to be serious, it's open to everybody, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the mailroom, literally, you could still do it, right? So this is a cultural thing with us. There's some people who believe it, you know, existentially, and there's others who just say, oh, you know, look, I got a new job because the core guy helped me do a great presentation, right? But, you know, other firms would say, oh, my bonus has been reduced by the amount of money I spend on core. But that is not us.
To give you a specific answer on how big our group is, our group at Element is 6 people, and they're ranging in skills and interests from computational designers typically, but more towards the side of fabrication and visualization and user interface designer. So we deliberately try to make it a very broad group of expertise, and it's very much, historically I think we're a little different from many other firms in that it's been almost entirely bottom-up initiatives. And those, in fact, one big one that we're in the midst of right now was brought to us by a summer intern 2 years ago, and we're still very invested in this research project that person launched with us. So it's important for us that it's one of the tools, in fact, that we rely on to allow great ideas to bubble up from places that are not at the top leadership. So that's sort of our version of the sort of open source.
So in our firm, research comprises about 10% of the overall staff, but their role is one that's more professorial, and they're basically a force multiplier. They're not there to do the work, ideally. They're there to help the teams refine their questions, help them learn the tools that are necessary, or help them develop tools if necessary to be able to do the work. And so that makes a small group fairly effective at distributing new and novel research practices throughout the entirety of the firm. So it's not like they're an in-house consultancy necessarily. They're really there to be those collaborators, to extend the capacity of design.
Yeah, to do it short, we are around 110 people, and 20 of us are in the research group. And we focus on 3 areas, which is circular economy and then behavior. Good point before that when you deliver the keys to the building, you never go back to the crime scene and see actually if your ideas work. Mm-hmm. So that's some of the tests we're looking at now, like how can we get this to work and get the feedback back. And the last thing is then the digital group. And we have for years now matured two of them, and behavior is the new thing, but what we want to do is kind of linking these three together in all different ways. But we don't see there's no border here. Like, we are all integrated into projects all the time. I think for the digital group, we are mainly part of the whole schematic and then to the end, while a lot of the other groups are also part of the competition department. So there's really no borders between that. It's just one firm when it comes to that.
We have about 190 people total. Right now, there are about 5 positions that are dedicated to, it's not a studio like Core. It's more of creating the environment and positions that they're allowed to explore. And this, because it's so new, we just established the current structure we have in the firm last year. So I am still, we're finalizing our plan for next year and now. And I've got some ideas I really haven't rolled out to anybody yet. I'm really dangerous. I sit in my office with, blank pieces of paper and a blue pen, and I draw these diagrams, and people get really scared. And now I have even more new ideas. I've just been sitting here today coming up with new ideas. So everyone should be very scared when I get back. But that's about, so it's 5 out of about 190 right now that I've got as a team of people that I feel like I'm really pulling from.
Well, Rob, so I'm not like a jerk. How many people are in Core and right now?
28 Core, 19 Core, and probably 50 people throughout the firm.
Okay, so in case you didn't hear, he said 28 in Core, and about 50 people throughout the firm participate in the R&D.
I think we have a question way in the back there.
Is this on? Can you hear? Okay. So on the subject of innovation and sort of institutionalizing that within an office, it's a part of a process that I'm part of with my firm. And it's interesting when these conversations distill down to something very specific. So I want to ask about this. In every firm that I've worked for, I think everybody signs a piece of paper when they get hired that effectively says, any idea you come up with while you work here is the property of the firm. And so we're bumping up against that right now as we're thinking about how do we seed innovation culturally within the organization. And the idea of sharing of IP is something that's on the table. And I'm curious if the group sitting here with us today have had chance to think about that, if that has come up in sort of discussions about charting a vision for the firm and so forth. The idea of that, what feels like a dinosaur of a document to me in the context of the conversations we're having here. Of course, the legal team within the firm doesn't see it that way. We run into that immediately, which makes it interesting. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So one of the things that we do is we actually have a separate company. It's a technology accelerator, and it's called Twin. It's spelled funny, TTWIIN. So you can go look at that, ttwiin.com, and see, in essence, companies that we have spun off from our own internal IP. In some of those cases, the employees literally left and joined the spin-off company. In other cases, the spin-off company is doing its business, and the inventors are still in Thornton Tomasetti. In those companies, we allow the inventors, the people who actually had the ideas and worked on the ideas, to share in the equity of those companies. So they can literally own stock in Hummingbird Kinetics or Pumpkin Mounts or Construe or OnScale, which are our four companies right now. And so that, and again, in some cases, as in the case of OnScale, the software that I just mentioned previously, that's where we had nine people leave our company and join OnScale as full-time OnScale employees. In the case of the others, we still have the inventors and founders in Thornton Tomasetti, but owning an equity piece of that spinoff. So I think that that's been an incentive for some people to stick around, and so I think that's one of the ways that we've handled it when we spun off that IP.
I would just mention one thing, and a little bit tangential to your question, but related nonetheless. One is that we've seen not a whole lot of value and a lot of costs in seeking formal IP protection patents, basically. We've secured a couple of patents at a lot of effort, and we've had some that have gone really far down the evaluation process at a significant cost that probably exceeded anything we'd ever see on a return. So I think we've become more relaxed about IP because of that. Things like code, you just make sure that you keep that under good wraps and you don't share it. But as far as something like an actual patent and things like that, I would recommend a more relaxed perspective, at least initially. Obviously, you guys have some things where it sounds like a patent's a pretty smart move. But from our perspective, we're a little more cautious now about when we bother to seek formal IP protection.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a piece of hardware, you need to patent that. The code is, I don't even think it's patentable. There may be processes and algorithms that could potentially be patentable, but the code
It's a high hurdle, though.
is just, just copyrighted.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So I have a question. I was wondering if you have a threshold for how you would pursue innovation. We can walk up next to your business. Do you have a threshold for how you would pursue innovation that caters to a market that may not be fully ready for it yet? And there are some great innovators who actually push products knowing that the consumers do not know yet that they want this. Steve Jobs was one. But there may be times when there are great ideas that cater to a market that does not yet exist. Do you have a threshold for how you would handle that kind of innovation?
Well, if anyone else wants to say something, but we have this the innovation horizon that we speak about all the time, right? So, out of your total budget, and it's not like every year, but on the average, we can spend there's the incremental innovation, adjacent innovation, and transformational innovation. And the transformational innovation is stuff that if it's like a wild idea that if it actually works would be transformational to society, right? So when you look at how at least we spend our money, it's probably about 60 to 70% incremental, which is improving our current processes, making us more productive. Probably about 20% is 20 to 30% is that adjacent, and then 5 to 10% is that transformational, right? So we are willing to make a bet on something that sounds right. Our stuff with trying to divert seismic waves, right? So if that works, that will transform society, right? Is it going to work? I don't know, but we spend a little bit of money on that, and we'll continue until we reach a stumbling block. So that says it's never going to work, right? So I think you have to be willing to take a little bit of your innovation portfolio and put it on something that doesn't have any apparent value at the moment, with the hope that it could. But certainly the bulk is going to be in that incremental and adjacent innovation space. And when we do our proposals, people have to actually say what category are they in, right? And we try to keep track and make sure over time it's 60, 30, 10, or something like that, right?
I think for us it's very different. Like we work in research projects, duration around 3 years, and we always do half and half, depending on innovation funds. So it's the innovation fund who funds it, and maybe they demand like 50% of your hours you have to pay yourself, and the other 50% the innovation fund pays, for example, in a broader perspective. And I think that's the setup for us. And an example is some years back we worked together with a robot company. And this robot company really wanted to grow. And our focus was together with all of the other partners to make that happen, which meant that for us it was really just a lot of knowledge, learnings. Also now we have them on speed dial if we need help for anything. I think that's our setup to really just have our hours paid, kind of, and that's it.
Well, let me just say, if you can get contract research, that's a whole different story. Then you work on whatever the person paying you wants you to work on.
Yeah, 50-50.
And in our applied science group, that's how that group has always worked. Most of the research is funded by, federal research dollars. And that's completely separate from what I'm talking about. That's like overhead dollars, right?
Cool. So all the speakers throughout the day were on time and kept their time slot. And me, the moderator, is the one that broke our time slot here right now. So I apologize on that. But as kind of like a concluding comment from each of you, knowing that in the audience there's a range of individuals from leadership down to the junior level, right? What is a comment that you can leave them with today? In terms of, being able to take this idea of incubating, ideas within the firm and being able to move the needle.
So look, if I'm looking out into the audience here, I may be the oldest guy in this room. And this is my best day, right? I love coming to work on this day. And nothing gets my juices flowing more than being around a group of people like this who basically want to change the world, or at least the world of the built environment. So I would just say, just keep, just keep pushing. Try it, right? I was speaking to a young fellow this morning, and he said, he bought, his company wasn't necessarily having the same idea around innovation, and if he had to go through a formal corporate approval to get a VR kit in-house, it would take him forever. So he just bought it and started to use it at work. And then he got a bonus and they paid him for it, right? So that, just do, I'm not saying that, but that's what you gotta feel that way. If you believe in your thing, just do it, right? Hopefully you can go to your boss and make them pay for it, but if not, and you really believe in it, and it's not going to break the bank, what the heck? Prove them wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think along that line, I've always felt that the best R&D organizations will eventually make themselves obsolete within their parent company, and that everybody will become like them, right? They're gonna infect everybody in that way, and the entire next thing you know, we don't have to see it as a isolated effort, but as something that's just simply what everybody's doing, and I think. And that can be done in many ways, but to Ray's point, I think the idea of sort of leading from wherever you are is probably the most salient point, and has certainly been really powerful for us in believing in anybody in the firm who's capable. Anybody in the firm is capable and should be capable and expected to deliver and contribute to that.
And I would actually echo your comment in a lot of ways. I was going to say, just keep pushing. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be shoving, but just keep leaning. And a lot of times that's the most effective way to change, is you have a particular goal in mind and you keep leaning towards it, you keep pushing. It can take years, but at the same time, every time you get a barrier and you have to surmount it, you improve your argument. So I think that's the key thing, is this is about communication of ideas ultimately. And keep that in mind and keep moving forward.
I think everything has been said here. Like I heard this quote some time ago, that it's not about being the best in the world anymore, it's about being the best for the world. And I think that really hit me a lot. And I think openness and just also sharing your ideas and collaborate, I think that's maybe also one of the important mindsets. I often see people get into the office and they are so focused on their own work, but we need also all of the sharing. Open sharing is very important to kind of continue, so keep doing that.
I think that you have to be very clear with yourself about what drives you and kind of what your real criteria is for making a positive impact, because I think we're very true to what we're really trying to achieve. And so I think that people that are passionate and happy about what they're contributing are contagious. And that's one of the things that I too love being in environments where I feel pushed and exposed to a way of thinking that I wasn't thinking. And so I think as long as you're really good at communicating in a positive way the value that you bring, don't be discouraged. Just make a positive impact and be fearless about it.
Thank you. So on that note, I think these individuals deserve more than just one round of applause. Thank you.